Hi everyone, Brian here. It's been quite a while since my last video. Things have just been really busy for me lately. While I have been working on content in what free time I've had, finding the time to put it all together for an upload has been tricky. I do all of these videos in my free time and I do have to fit them around all the boring responsibilities of being an adult. But I'm back for another video, and this time I'm going to show you how I paint the Death Company for my Blood Angels army. Now this is a really simple recipe with no oil washes. That means it can be done in any order you like. You can paint in the details, or you can do the edge highlights first, whichever you prefer. In this video, I'm going to cover the basic Death Company scheme. And in my next video, I'll show you my Death Company officers, because that video will make a good demonstration of how I glaze fabrics and power swords. So as always, if you find anything useful, please consider throwing me a like or subscribing to the channel. Now, let's get started. Starting with my models primed black, I give them all a thin coat of Vallejo Game Air Black through the airbrush. This gives me an exact colour match if I make mistakes. And I also give them a very thin coat of Vallejo Gloss Varnish. This is just going to help with the edge highlighting later, but also it just helps to protect that base coat. Now, I really suck at painting the red crosses by hand. So I've bought these resin moulds from a seller on Etsy. And I'm going to give them a coat of Citadel Base Corn Red. Simply search for things like Death Army Crosses or Blood Army Death Squad on Etsy and you'll find loads of great options for things like this. These are designed for the shoulder pads, but with a little trimming, I was able to put them onto the power gloves too. I also give the bolter and chainsword casings a coat of corn red too. Oh, and go ahead and give the lenses a thin coat too. It's perfect to do at this stage because you can easily cover up any mistakes with your black base coat. I want to give these items a really good battle-worn effect. That's why I'm starting with the darker red. I want them to look as if they've been salvaged and handed down from previous Death Company members, and to make them look like they're being worn as a badge of honour. So the only places left now where I have to freehand crosses are on the knee pads or on the back of the power packs. I tried a few different methods, but nothing was really foolproof. The best conclusion I came to was, it just takes practice. Now, I hate that term, but alas, it's true with most things. So I'll just summarise the two best methods I discovered. The first is to find the centre of the area that you're trying to paint and just give it a tiny red dot. Then you can use that as a guide to either draw straight lines from one side to the other, or you can draw 4 lines inwards towards the dot. The other is just to paint in one smooth, sweeping motion at the angle you desire. Now I think I prefer this method best, because in the lower, these are actually hand painted on. So it doesn't matter if they're a little off between models, it adds a little bit of variation. Next up, I paint the pouches in Citadel Base Rhinox Hide. And the purity seals get a coat of Citadel Base Rakarth Flesh. And the wax is done with Vallejo Game Heavy Violet. And moving on, I now paint in all the metallics. Anything that I want silver is going to be given a coat of Vallejo Metal Dark Aluminium. This includes the chainsword blades, bolters, and maybe some accessories for a little bit of variety. So you'll notice I'm not worrying too much about being neat at this stage. There's going to be plenty of time to tidy up later. For the gold items, I'm going to give them a thin base coat of Scale 75 Elven Gold. This includes the Aquila, and the casings of any blood gems or accessories. And since my squads are made up from some push-fit intercessors, some are going to have the Indomitus symbol on their sword arm, so I'm going to give that a coat too. So that's all the basic components done. You can go ahead and tidy up any mistakes now, or you can wait until after the next stage. Or if you really want to copy my method, you can just do it when you remember. Next up, I give all the resin crosses, the bolters, the chain swords and the eye lenses a coat of Citadel Shade Nuln Oil. The leather pouches get a coat of Citadel Shade Agrax Earthshade, and the purity seals get a coat of Seraphim Sepia. Then finally I take some Citadel Contrast Guilliman Flesh and paint this towards the recesses of anything gold. I'm applying this neat, but I'm trying to get it to settle into the places where it's going to create some depth. On some models I did do this after the edge highlighting, but you can really do it at any stage you prefer. After touching up some more mistakes with my Vallejo Game Black, I give the Mini another thin coat of gloss varnish. This is just to help unify the texture of the paint on any areas where you've covered up a mistake. Next up, I'm going to do the edge highlights. For this I'm going to mix up equal parts of Citadel Layer Dark Reaper and Vallejo Glaze Medium. The reason I'm doing this is because black tends to show up any imperfections, and I think this method helps to soften that. And I'm going to paint over every raised edge with my 00 brush. You see, my hands aren't steady enough to be able to make each highlight progressively thinner, so I find that this method gives me a slight margin for error on the next highlight. Now it takes time, but I'm going to go over every raised area as neatly as I can, and remember, you can tidy up any mistakes that you make with your black base coat. Because it's a glaze, it won't be fully opaque, so don't worry if it doesn't look quite right at this stage. That's because of the texture difference between the paint layer and the gloss varnish, but it will come together towards the end. Once all that's done, I take a solid edge highlight of Dark Reaper, and I'm going to give every sharp edge another edge highlight with the side of my brush. You can see that it really helps to soften the highlight and gives it a slight fading effect. Next up is the second edge highlight of Citadel Layer Thunderhawk Blue. This time I'm just thinning with a little bit of water, and I'm going to apply this to every edge. But I'm not going to cover up my previous Dark Reaper. Then finally, the third highlight of Citadel Layer Fenrisian Grey. And I'm going to keep this highlight very small and focused on the apex of any curved areas or sharp corners. Things like the corners of the shoulder pads or the visor on the helmet. So with that done, I give it another light coat of varnish to unify the texture and protect the highlights. Remember that varnishing in between different stages of the miniature is really your save as button. So I know I use a lot of it, but it really does help to protect your model from any mistakes that you make later on. So you can see here a comparison with a model with finished highlights and another which is just at the first stage. Now I'm going to move on to the details. Taking my Citadel Corn Red, I'm going to thin that down almost to a glaze. And then taking a small brush, I'm going to begin to stipple that all over the casings of the weapons and the resin crosses. I'm trying to keep it random, and I don't want to go over the edges too much. The goal is to make it look battle-worn, so I generally stay away from the outer edges, and I build up the layers, creating small patches of solid corn red here and there. Next up, I take some Citadel Base Mephiston Red and do exactly the same. This time, I create smaller patches of bright red, and I try to keep it as random as I can, but I also apply a little bit to where I think the light would catch. I also apply the Mephiston Red to my hand-painted crosses on the knees and backpack, and I try to keep that within the original corn red. This helps to really make them pop and colour match with the other crosses on the shoulder pads and power gloves. Returning to the weapons and crosses, I take some Citadel Rhinox hide and a very old splayed brush, and I wipe off all the excess paint. I then stipple this onto the edges to give a rust and chipped effect. Then I take some Vallejo Metal Dark Aluminium, and I'm going to stipple this onto those areas at random to make it look like exposed metal. Now don't worry if you overdo it at this stage, remember you can always go back in with some corn red and Mephiston red and cover up any mistakes. And now I'm going to highlight all of the gold with Vallejo Metal Gold. Once again, this is an airbrush paint, so I really need to wipe off all the excess from my brush, otherwise it's going to overspill. And I'm going to try and catch the raised areas of the Aquila, the accessories and the Indomitus symbol. Don't worry if this overspills slightly, because we can easily correct this next. Next up, I take some Citadel Shade Reichland Flesh Shade, and I simply give all of the gold items a wash. This settles down into the recesses, helping to cover up any mistakes and warming up those highlights at the same time. Lastly, I'm going to give the pouches an edge highlight of Citadel Mournfang Brown. Then I added a drop of Wraithbone to make it a shade lighter, and I gave those a second edge highlight. For the weapons and the chainsword, I'm going to give those a few edge highlights of Citadel Runefang Steel. So if you prefer transfers for your models, this is the perfect stage to apply them. I'm going to be using some micro sol here, which will allow them to curve correctly and help them look painted on. First off, I wet the surface with a small amount of water, and I place the transfer, eventually, where I want it to be. Now I'm going to leave that to dry for about 15 or 20 minutes. Then I'm going to take an older brush and dip that into the microsol, and I'm going to gently dab that onto the transfer. Microsol actually softens and essentially melts the transfer and allows it to adhere to an uneven surface. Depending on the surface, you may need to do this 3 or 4 times. After giving that about 30 minutes to be completely dry, I'm going to give the model one last coat of Vallejo Polyurethane Gloss Varnish. This makes sure that the transfer and all the paint is unified across the entire miniature. As you can see, it really helps to remove any of the textures from the transfers and gives them a painted on look. As for the bases, I'm going to be doing these exactly the same as the rest of my Blood Angels army, but I'm going to hold off until all of the squads are complete and then I can do them all at once. But please feel free to check out my video on Blood Angels basing. I'll link it in the card above. Now finally, I've decided to give these guys a coat of satin varnish. Ultramatte varnish on black creates a more charcoal look, and I think the satin varnish is a very nice compromise. So I'm going to be using Lucky Satin Varnish from Ammo by MiG. And that helps to keep the deep black colour, and it gives them such a great contrast against their Blood Angel brothers on the battlefield. And for now, I'm done. I really enjoyed painting these guys. It's been such a welcome break from painting standard Blood Angel troops, and I've learnt some new techniques which I'm definitely going to apply to my future models. I really do hope to get the rest of them complete soon, but I'm going to concentrate on the officers, a captain and a lieutenant, to get them done so my next video won't take quite so long. So that's it for now. I really do hope you find some new ideas or techniques in this video that you can try out on your own armies. If you have, please feel free to drop me a like, leave a comment below, or subscribe to the channel for more content in the future. I really do appreciate all of your comments and support so far, so thank you everyone. So until next time, remember, enjoy your painting, have fun, and I'll see you soon.